All right. So my name is Courtney Kissler. I'm currently at Nike leading the digital platform engineering teams, but actually started my career in security, worked at a startup, and then went to Nordstrom as a security engineer. And it was super eye-opening to join a retailer in that type of role because, as you can imagine, we weren't everybody's favorite person. So often I would show up at meetings with our dev teams and they'd just be like, all right, what are you going to tell us we can't do? And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like how to not be the blocker for delivering value. And I think that's a theme that you're hearing kind of throughout the talks today is that it's about speed and quality, and you don't have to trade off quality to get speed. And I consider security to be a component of a product around quality, and you should be able to get both. So what I love about Wolfgang's talk is that I think when you're in it, sometimes it's hard to see what you can be doing differently. And having something that you can, I think Mark said earlier, all of these experience reports should be something that you can take back and do something with immediately. I truly believe this talk is going to be definitely something that you can do. And by talking about it in a 90-day window, I think gives people something meaningful and tangible that they can focus on. So with that, I'll introduce Wolfgang.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so first step, clicker, excellent. All right, in general, I do advisory services, program assessment, program development, and in general, when I'm doing advisory service around DevOps, the conversation goes something like this. We got the CIO, we got the CISO, right? And the CISO's who's usually talking to me. And the CIO, if it's a SaaS product, they're building apps. They're building great apps for customers. And if it's internal, they're building infrastructure components and shared services for internal customers. And at some point in time, that CIO went, hey, I need a dev team. I need a dev manager, I need a dev staff, I need policies, I need procedures, I need all the artifacts of development. And all that's put in place, and life is good. And the CISO goes, you know what, that's some great stuff you're building, it delivers lots of value, we need to secure that. And so, of course, the AppSec person is born. And I loved it when we went around earlier and everyone raised their hands. The percentage of people in the AppSec role in here is fantastic. Because what happens is, as AppSec, we're like, this is great, we've got this. All this value is coming from this SDLC. We've injected our controls, we're doing all the right things, and the code is being produced in a relatively good way. And then we'll go out to drinks and we'll talk about how there's a bunch of problems that we're not going to talk about on the slide. But the sense is, we're doing the right things. Now, some time goes by, and the CIO hears about this wonderful thing about DevOps. Some time goes by, and that dev team goes, you know what, I'm really sick of all these forms and all these control gates and all this process. And I'm really sick of how long it takes the firewall guys to make the changes. And they go, you know what, there's this thing called DevOps. And they start building DevOps, right? So they get a DevOps initiative going on. Maybe it's a pilot project, maybe it's something small, maybe it's a skunk works. And this small little seed grows. And as we all know, because we're in here, because we love DevOps, it starts to show some real value. This stream goes from a trickle to a torrent, and more value goes through it. And then, at some point in time, the security guy gets a call and starts to panic. And I get called in usually right about this point. There was one time, it was last summer, I helped an organization build an app, and it wasn't until the board brought in the CISO to brief them on this brand new application they're building that the CISO's like, yeah, we totally got all the right controls and the SDLC and everything. And the board's like, wait, I hear it's the DevOps team that's doing this. The CISO's like, so I get a call. What's a DevOps? And do they really all need root? Like, yes, they do. So, and this isn't unusual, right? It happens more and more because DevOps become more and more popular. And it's actually the nature of technology. Early adopters, developers get really excited. There's this hype. There's this excitement around a build. And I tell you today, if you want to see the future, and know what we're all going to be panicking about in RSA in 2020, hit a developer conference this year and find out what they're all really excited about. Because everyone was really pumped about DevOps, like 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2 years goes by, value is added, products are shipping, and all of a sudden the security folks are like, you did what now? And it happens all the time. In 2015, I sat in on the first session where people were excited about Kubernetes. 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting down with the customer going, and there's this Kubernetes thing, and they're automating everything, and it's terrible. I'm like, yes, I know. So we need to get ahead of this cycle, and that's what this talk is about. This talk is about the first 90 days after you get that call, we're doing DevOps, what do you do now? How do you build a security program in place? It's going to be about things like building relationships, managing perceptions. It's going to be things about growing your own competencies so you can talk intelligently to the developer people and the operations folks. And of course, delivering wins. And like any good person, I'm citing my sources. A lot of that framework right there comes from the first 90 days. It's what I use when I'm building a process. It's what I use when I'm building a program. It's also what I use when I'm building talent development. You might go, hey, that sounds like a great book. And you read the reviews, and the reviews go, yeah, it's a great book, but don't do it. Because they're going to say, do everything real fast and make a whole bunch of changes. And a lot of times, folks who follow the first 90 days immediately implement a whole bunch of changes and run into a brick wall, and the wheels come off. So number one lesson about DevOps in the first 90 days, don't change too much. They're working. Things are fine. I know there's risk, and things are out of control, but we can handle this. So I'm going to break first 90 days up like this. We're going to learn about what the developers are doing, the ops folks are doing. We're going to assess where we're at, and then we're going to build together a plan. It's a three-stage model, first third, second third, third third of a 90-day program. So at the beginning, you get the call. We're doing DevOps. The very first thing you should always ask when you hear doing DevOps is what? Are you really, though? Are you really doing DevOps? I was at a financial services firm early on in the DevOps days. It's where I met Mark. It's where I met a lot of the folks. And I was like, we're doing DevOps. And I was using all the terms, and I was using all the lingo, and I had the rituals, and we had the whole 9 yards, and my developers had access, and my ops people were engaged. But there's no automation, right? There's no meat behind it. So in the beginning, we have to actually begin with, are these developers really doing DevOps, or are they calling it DevOps to avoid the SDLC, which has become too onerous? Step one. Step two, let's assume we are doing DevOps. We have to understand our maturity curve. And of course, the maturity curve is on two steps, right? It's on the dev side, but it's also equally on the ops side. And that maturity curve is important because it tells us where we can add value, which is a great place to be as a security person. It also tells us where we need to avoid. Example number one, this is great. I've got this great control. You've got a vulnerability. We're going to push out a new instance. It's going to be patched. It's going to be hardened. It's going to be everything you need. You're going to migrate your app to it. Bazam, we're great on the next build. And if there's any problems, we'll roll back. And that's a great control. It's a good control. It's a fantastic control. It makes the vulnerability manager and me excited. You go to someone who's like, yeah, but our ops is all still really manual, and immediate pushback. So idea about this is if you think back to the DevOps maturity model in the beginning of this, the idea of managing pushback in the beginning, right, that phase one, that burp phase, we want to avoid that pushback. So conversely, it allows us to find areas where we can actually add value. We go to these folks and they say, yeah, that's great, but we're really new and our dev side is not really as automated as we want. And we go, great, what if we were to give you a pipeline and save you some time? I love that example in the beginning where she was talking about how they brought a standard pipeline in place and people jumped on that pipeline because it saved them time, accelerated their growth, and there in the pipeline was all the security controls. If we know where we're at, we can do that. And then, of course, we have to figure out what our pipeline is. What are the tools used for CI/CD? How is it being processed? What are the things behind it? Et cetera, et cetera. Now, not so often acknowledged part of all this is DevOps is cool, right? It's exciting. We're making new things. The idea is that we should be pretty much tool agnostic. We can phase things in and out. We're still experimenting. And back in the early days in DevOps, it really felt like 1990s. And now today in DevOps, when I look at the pipeline, it reminds me again of the 1990s. Specifically, you guys remember that screensaver? I used to love that thing. That's DevOps, right? We say all the time, oh, you got to secure the pipeline. But the pipeline isn't one thing. There's many, many pipelines, and it's constantly changing. One of the individuals I reached out to when I was putting together this plan, started sanity checking, and was like, yeah, that's cute, a pipeline, 10 pipelines, that's hilarious. I'm like, well, what do you mean? 100? He's just chuckles. He goes, no, higher. Like 1,000? He goes, you're getting close. Like, what the heck? He has got a micro pipeline for just about every service. It's crazy. So we got to start there. We got to figure out what those individual pipelines are, at least at a high level. You're not going to check 1,000 in 30 days, of course, but at a high level. The next thing is we need to start establishing relationships. And in my head, that looks something like this. Security walks in the room. They all clap. It never happens. But I'm sticking with the stock art. We need to figure out who's who. And part of that is, of course, putting them at ease, that we're not coming in as security to slow everything down and to grind to a halt all the progress they've made. Part of that is building those relationships so that we can recognize the value that they've added, recognize the great things they're doing, and learn from them. If we go into this with the idea of, oh my God, they're doing DevOps, so we got to stop, we've already lost. If we go into this of, this is really cool, they're doing something fantastic, new, and exciting, how can I learn, capture that momentum, and accelerate it? While putting in some controls, we're in a much better place. So we start off with establishing relationships. That rounds out 30 days, right? 30-day wins. We want to know who's who. We want to know the size of our universe. What are the applications that are being used? What are the pipelines that support them? And something that's almost never talked about at a tech conference, we need to be alive. We need to make that 30 days and go, oh, okay, I can do this. I can go a little bit longer. Very, very stressful the first 90 days of any of these processes. So we got to make sure we put time in place to do good stress management along with good task management. What does that look like? If you're going to meet with your very important stakeholder who controls one of your most important apps and several of the pipelines and everything associated with it, schedule time ahead of time to do nothing in your office, which is exactly the opposite of what any technologist would do. You're going to run in your phone, you're going to be updating Twitter, checking Facebook, making sure all your to-dos list, saying one last text to your guy as you walk in, you go, oh, nice to meet you. Okay, I'm here to talk to you all about security. Boom, you lost. You've already lost. We got to have that space, which is something that's easy to overlook, so that we can build these relationships and build these competencies and really have our heads in the moment, right? That's the first 30 days. Now, we roll into the next 60 days. Things are starting to make a little more sense, starting to get our hands around it. We're looking at the pipeline, and like any good technologist, at this point, we're like, hey, this is great. What if they did code review, and what if they did SaaS, and how about DAST? And let's put a sticky note and stick it over here. We could also do some interactive testing. And oh, that reminds me of software composition. I saw this great stat where they're downloading all these vulnerabilities, and they're injecting them, so we got to do that. And wait a minute, we should do RASP, because if we provision a web application firewall on every single microservice, that'll slow everything down. What do we just build it in the pipeline? All great things. But at this point in time, even though our pressure internally is to do this, even though pressure oftentimes is externally, because the CISO's going, you've been spending 30 days, what have you done yet? We need to remember not to go too fast. We need to remember to step back and assess all the different possibilities and put it inside of a framework. Good advice there is assess is the key word, not auditors. No one likes auditors. I don't even think auditors like auditors. We've come up with, oh, you guys laugh, but you know what I'm saying about. Don't you all have your playbook when the auditors come? Here's the forms we give them. Here's the story we tell, not the real story. Here's the thing we say to, oh, look over there, I think that other guy has a problem, you should go check it out, right? Am I wrong? No, we all do that to auditors. I was talking with one of my guys. We're launching a GDPR. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We're doing a GDPR engagement this week and next week and the week after for a SaaS company. And he's like, we're going to come in and audit. Oh, man, I wanted to smack him upside the head. I waited, but I wanted to. So assess, and assess to a checklist. We build our checklist. A lot of different ways to build a checklist. NIST, of course. We heard earlier today about taking all those 500 pages down to 50. Not necessarily a checklist that we're going to say, hey, haha, you should do all this stuff, but just a framework, a reference. ISO, every time I say ISO, there's usually a gasp in the room. But I come from Detroit. We're the manufacturing capital. We all do ISO. And actually, ISO, in any one of these, can be used to build a good DevOps program. A couple years ago, we built one to ISO, tying it all back to a culture of quality, which was very, very effective because the organization was already aware of what went into an ISMS and what those steps look like. If not, NIST or ISO, if your organization is not using those, you're going to, of course, look at the Cloud Security Alliance or BSIM or SAM, all great things. So we start with our checklist of everything possible. The key point here is to use a checklist that's in line with what your organization is already looking at. And usually what's driving that is regulation, of course, but most importantly, is customers. The most important checklist of all, especially if you're a SaaS vendor or have external customers, is what your customers are asking you, that vendor checklist, right? It says you gotta be this tall to ride the ride. And please fill out this paperwork to prove it. Doesn't seem like much, but it drives a lot of behavior. And it points out a key relationship we have to build, which is the business development guys, the sales guys, right? When I talk about the GDPR project I'm working with, that wasn't the CISO who called me, that was the sales guy, their head of business development was like, Wolf, I'm concerned we're gonna lose business if we don't address this GDPR thing. Like, great, let's talk about that. And it's one of the most valuable lessons that I've had in security is following the money. ROI gets so abused in our world. We got ROI. Yeah? Yes, we totally got, the spreadsheet says we're gonna save money. Okay. I've had to report to many CFOs and they've torn up every one of those. Like, Wolf, are you really making money? Because it seems to me that this is a really cute spreadsheet, but it's not ROI. If we can actually put security in place that preserves revenue, drives revenue, meets customer requirements, creates a competitive advantage, it's a great story to tell. So follow the money. And of course, continue building those relationships. The business development folks, the HR folks, the legal folks, people beyond the technical folks that you want to meet in the first 30 days. In the next 30 days, you want to be broadening those out and using these assessments not as a point to say, ha, you fool, you didn't know, you should, but using this assessment as a way to say, hey, let's have a conversation. I want to learn from you. What have you been doing? What works? What doesn't? What have you tried, right? Having some dialogue around each one of those things. Coming out of that first 30 days to 60 days, some of the wins you want to have is building an advisory council, informal, your security champions. The organizations that invariably win at inserting sec into DevOps, the organizations that invariably win in standing up DevSecOps are the organizations that have the developers as the champion, as that voice, right? You heard it again and again and again here, that culture that comes from speaking the developer speak and knowing how it all goes together. How do you find those though, right? It can be very difficult. Part of it is those relationships. Part of it is, let's say you're doing lunch and learns, creating opportunities to pull people in place. We did a series of lunch and learns, and we did something that I thought was pretty clever. We had the one-on-one content. Come for the free meal, we'll put up slides, we'll tell you about how bad things are and scare you. And of course, most people came for the free meal, they ate food, and they waited for us to be done, and they went back to the desks. Invariably though, there's always those folks that sit forward, and the same folks who oftentimes, if you're lucky, come up and ask a few questions afterwards, after everyone's already left. They don't want to be seen by their peers to be associated with the security people. Again, no one claps. I don't know why people don't clap. So what we did was, instead of scheduling internally 1 hour for that lunch and learn, we scheduled 2 hours. 2 hours, 1 hour for the formal public agenda. Second hour is the 200 level content. People come up, oh, that's a great question. Hey, I've got some other slides. You want me to keep going? And we spent extra time giving extra information to those 1 or 2 folks who would stay after. And then made sure we followed up with them at the 60-day mark and the 90-day mark and made sure we engaged them to build that council and build that relationships. Those are the folks who can tell you if the wheels are going to come off with your ideas or not. Those are the folks who are going to be your early warning to say, yeah, don't say that word to that guy. Here, say it this way. I'm like, oh, great. Those are your heroes. Find your pilot pipeline or pilot app. What is the one area, following the money, following the champions, now that we've assessed the curves for dev maturity and ops maturity, what's the one area that if we were to improve, we could have a really good case study? Again, DevOps comes from planting a seed and watching it grow. We want to use that exact same model. If we could plant a seed and watch it grow and build some momentum and have developers talking about how great it was or how we sped things up or even just having the win of, hey, they didn't suck and they're okay. That's a win. We'll take that win. We can identify that. That's what we need to have by the 60-day mark. What is that pilot going to be? And of course, have our maturity model. Now, we're not going to say, hey guys, here's everything you did wrong and everything you should do. But internally, here's a backlog of all the different things that we've thought about, all the different things that align to the standards. Here's how they tie back to our organization, if they're NIST or ISO. Here's how they tie back to customer requirements. And this becomes our backlog, which we'll talk about a little bit, a couple slides further. This becomes our backlog as we decide to roll out and implement security. And finally, still being alive. At the 60-day mark, that's a win. Remembering that task management, remembering that stress management, keeping the pulse, keeping the pace, keeping in the moment, and making sure there's enough time to sharpen the saw and learn and build good relationships as we move forward. So that gets us to the 90-day mark, right? And we're starting to feel a little bit better. We're starting to feel a little calm. We've got an idea. There's still that pressure to go, you know what? Now that we met everyone, what if we were to train them? And what if we did a peer review? And you know what? It'd be really great if we did threat modeling. Does anyone ever do really good threat modeling, by the way? If anyone does, see me after. Because one guy raises his hand. I'm like, I do. OK, see me after. We're talking. But at least building like evil use cases. You guys heard this, right? Our use cases here, we put stuff in the shopping cart. Our evil use cases, someone's going to steal stuff from the shopping cart and putting controls around that place. Wait a minute, what if we did unit testing? So every time we ship stuff, we were testing for those. And we got to do vulnerability management because, as we all know, the vulnerability in our code is like this, but the vulnerability in everything else is like that. I love the story earlier, a couple talks ago, where they're like, yeah, we built absolutely clean code, which every single layer had a vulnerability and that could be patched. Got to have the vulnerability management. And then we're going to bring in the pen testers. And we got this idea that we got to do all these things. So we got the backlog and the CISO still going, you know, you've been doing this 60 days now, Wolf. When am I going to see some progress? We're going to get there, I promise. Next thing we got to do is agree on what the outcome is with our security folks and agree on how we're going to measure that outcome. I had said something a while back, and it ended up on a slide. So I took a photo of a slide. Seems like there should be a meme here. But defect density, right? If you know, OK, X number of lines of code has a defect, and for every one of those defects, you know, maybe 1 in 20 is a bug, and for every one of those bugs, maybe 1 in 10 is exploitable, and therefore you can track, based on lines of code, how you're doing. And this went on Twitter. Josh Corman posted it, and everyone's like, whoa, wait a minute, you're making too many assumptions, and Java's better than Ruby, and .NET beats everyone, and it's going to vary by language, and Wolf, aren't you too optimistic, and maybe you just work with really good developers or really bad developers. So to answer all those questions that none of you tweeted at me, in case you're wondering, yes, it's going to vary by language. Yes, it's going to vary by platform. Yes, I'm really kind of too optimistic. I should be more cynical. And yes, I'm usually fortunate to work with really good developers. But the point here is not those numbers. The point here is, do you have an outcome? And do you have a measure that you can say, are we progressing towards that outcome or not? And if your outcome is one of security, and if your outcome is one of quality, and you tie it down to code, you should be able to say, how many defects do we have? How many of those are progressing? How many of those are exploitable? Because then you can have some great conversations. You can have great conversations about, hey, we're all committed to delivering high-quality products, low defects. We have these issues we need to talk about. Every one of these lines of code that has a defect becomes a moment in time not only to address that individual defect, but a moment in time to have a culture conversation. How did it get there in the first place? Is it important? Is it not important? Is there a way that we can fix this? In doing this, one of the organizations I worked with identified they kept having the same vulnerability introduced time and time again. We'd pen test, we'd find it. We'd pen test, we'd find it. It'd be over here, it'd be over there, it'd be on a report. It was an injection flaw in how they're connecting the database, time and time again. So finally, we moved to this model and said, well, rather than me just giving you another report of how you did bad and you fixed this one, why does it keep happening? They're like, oh, I recognize that code. I'm like, great, what is it? Oh, that's the code of our internal wiki that we copy every time we instantiate a new connection to a database. Okay. My red team was really bummed not to find that the next year. But you get the point. One line of code at a time, one metric at a time is a moment in time to talk about the outcome and contain lessons and push forward that agenda that hopefully we've all committed to. That requires us knowing the adoption curve and where we're at that. The 30-day mark is usually where we're talking to innovators, the people are excited, the people want to know more, people lean forward. Or adopters is usually who we're reaching at 60 days, and the early majority is where we're reaching at 90 days. And each one of these groups you're going to talk to a little bit differently. The innovators are going to be like, everything's bad and it's terrible, and I'm so excited you're here, and we're going to do all this great stuff. And you're like, yes, but slow your roll, because if you tell everyone that, they're going to freak out. And the early adopters are like, yeah, we could do a couple of this stuff, right? And the majority just wants to know that you're not going to slow them down. And so we got to keep in mind each one of those types of groups and how we have that conversation. And we also have to keep in mind, of course, this great thing that is DevOps that, again, reminds me of a 90s screensaver. That's always changing. Now, here's a conundrum that I have with a lot of security folks. The preferred way, the textbook way, if you're CISSP, all apologies to the ISC squared folks, is to create a multi-year roadmap. 3 years would be great. If you could have a Gantt chart, that'd be terrific. Can we just plot it all out and show exactly where we're going to go? And at the same time, we're trying to take this waterfall concept, a very, very waterfall concept, and apply it to a very quickly moving DevOps world. And even if you think of a 3-year model, and you can do that, and you can spend the time to do that, I already said in 2020, whatever the developers are talking about this week is what we're all going to be panicking about, right? How do we even know what security is going to look like in 2020, or 2019, or 2 quarters from now? Very, very difficult. So rather than do the traditional let's build a roadmap, I would challenge you guys to all think of security as a product. If you think about all those different features, all those different requirements, all the different settings on the checklist, everything in NIST or ISO or whatever you align to, and you think about it as doing one of 2 things, or hopefully both, protecting the organization, right? Protecting that revenue stream, protecting the application, making sure it stays up and has a high degree of integrity, or preventing the threat. Evil use cases, your abuse cases, whatever you want to call it, stopping the bad guys from getting in and stealing some of that revenue your application is making. If that is security, if security is a product and all those requirements are possible, those requirements become your backlog. And I think if we take what we've done really, really well in DevOps, if we take what we've done, which is automation, agile, and whatnot, if we take what we've done in that world and apply it to security, it actually gives us some really interesting insights. We can begin to think about things in terms of user experience design. How can we make this experience better for our developers? More seamless for the people who are actually implementing the code and whatnot. We can begin to think about how to phase these things in, applying the lessons from industrial design and so on. Each one of those requirements now becomes a feature, and by thinking about features, we can manage as a backlog, and managing a backlog, we can use what DevOps has taught us and Agile has taught us over the past 10 years of security or software development in the security space. And then too, the DevOps guys like it, because like, haha, I know that artifact, I recognize that. This other thing right here you want to do, did you know that at the end of Q2, we're actually going to have a slow period? I bet you we could do that. You know, and when they get to that point and you're all looking the same way and they're like, yeah, we could fit this work in here and this is what I estimate, that's such a good feeling to have. Not going to hit that in 90 days, but you can set a path to that so by the end of year 1 you can get there. So what are the wins looking at those 90 days that you want to come up with? Having that advisory council, informal advisory council, and getting the innovators and the early adopters to buy in so they can give you advice. And you want to continue to nurture and sustain those relationships over the first full year. So hopefully, if you'd like, at the end of year 1, you can actually formalize that advisory council. Hopefully, if you like, when you get budget and you go, I want to hire someone, you can hire someone out of that advisory council. It's another thing I see very successful early stage DevOps teams doing is hiring those very same people who stay a little bit longer in the lunch and learn and volunteer a little bit extra time and understand the world and understand all those relationships. You're basically buying relationships at that time and buying that internal tribal knowledge and helping apply it to security. And now, too, we've got that roadmap, and the roadmap in the form of a backlog, a set of features that we can progress on using the same rituals and techniques that DevOps has been so good at doing. And of course, we're still alive, hopefully. Still managing stress. Made it through the first 90 days. Everyone can take a break. Actually, honestly, I'm not kidding. At the end of the first 90 days, I usually recommend just a couple-day vacation. Celebrate, enjoy it, spend some time with loved ones. We made it. So in doing this, we're looking at building the relationships and managing the perceptions from those first impressions that happen in the first 30, 60 days, all the way through to getting buy-in and showing them that you care, that you're going to protect their value stream, that you're going to work with them in a collaborative fashion, and that you can gain buy-in from those relationships to rally around an outcome. Could it be quality? Could it be security? Could it be like we were talking with Fannie Mae about protecting the ultimate end user? Whatever that is, you've got the relationships and the perception that you care and you build up that trust so that when you go to get buy-in on an outcome, you can do so. And once you have buy-in on an outcome, now you've built up competency by looking at the CI/CD, learning very carefully what they actually do, learning what works, what doesn't, what tools are available, so that you can actually develop the security program appropriately. And of course, moving from that, you've got a win, right? You've got this one pilot program that you put in place that's a win that can be communicated out and pushed. And hopefully done so while avoiding pushback, because the minute you walk in the room, they're going to be like, oh, security guys are going to change everything. avoiding pushback, avoiding paralysis when they see that check. Never tell them how bad it is, folks. When you look at that list, don't tell them how bad it is. Avoiding paralysis when they see how many vulnerabilities there are or how many items are on a NIST checklist. Avoiding that paralysis and managing through that so that we can get some momentum and carry it forward. That's what the first 90 days looks like. Some good ways to do that is, again, follow the money. If you're a SaaS vendor, now's a great time to do that. There are organizations who actually have demonstratable real-world ROI where they increase their business by using security as a competitive value, which I love. Build the backlog so that you know what you need to implement and win, and define success, and use that backlog and success to move things forward. Use that backlog and success to sprinkle quick wins throughout your first year. It's another thing, real quick. If you think of first wins like kindling, you guys ever make fire, right? You got a little kindling, you light it, and you got the big logs. A lot of people like go through all those first quick wins really quick. Like, look, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And the CISO's like, that's great, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And it's like, that's fantastic, and I did this, and I did this. Like, awesome, and now you're like day 100. You're like, and my next thing will be done in a year. And CISO's like, okay, what happened? Did we lose momentum? Did we lose speed? What's going on? Make sure that you spread out the quick wins and don't use them all up, but spread them out over that first year. Even though it's really tempting to burn through them, use them as kindling to continue forward and maintain a cadence of win. And think of security again like DevOps. We want to start small. We want to iterate fast. We want to take the lessons we learn, apply them back across all stages. And that's a solid, I believe, first 90 days in the world of DevOps. Mark, do you want me to take questions, or how are we doing? We got time for one or two questions if anyone has one. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, very good. Thank you so much. Enjoy DevOps Day.